All right, we hope everyone had a nice short break. Next, we'll hear from a panel on future of housing in Canada. Canada is in the midst of a national housing crisis with a need to build more homes faster and more affordably. This panel will explore the housing challenges our cities face and the innovative ideas to help us overcome those challenges. So we would like to welcome back Helen Kerr to introduce our panelists and moderate this session.
Thank you so much. I mentioned in my previous talk several times that this is really the most important talk, not my talk.
No pressure.
Because they have really interesting, current, and important examples to share with you today. So I'm very excited to introduce. So I'm going to start at this end. So Adrienne Pacini, who's a partner at SHS Consulting, in Toronto, but works all over the place. I'm not going to give you full, long bios because they can tell you a little bit each about the work that they're doing. Sean Campbell, who's the Executive Director of Union Co-operative, who'll be sharing some interesting work with us. And Mayor Dorothy McCabe from the City of Waterloo. So thank you, all of you. I'm going to set the stage just a little bit. So when I was talking before, I was talking looking forward. And when we think about housing, you know, we think about housing as a crisis in the moment, that we need more housing and we need it to be affordable. But if we project into the future, are we going to need the same housing that we're creating? Are we going to be able to withstand the kind of environmental shifts, the kind of aging changes, the kind of economic turbulence that's ahead of us? So if we project forward over the next 10, maybe even 20 years, what is housing actually going to look like? And if we have to build it now, are we able to build housing that's going to do something for the future? So that's really the topic. And I'm going to ask you to go around. Maybe I'll start this time with you, Dorothy. And have you tell people what you're doing, why you're here, what's interesting in your world.
Okay, thank you, and thanks very much for the opportunity to speak here today on behalf of the City of Waterloo. We're in a two-tier municipal structure, just so people understand. So I'm the mayor of the City of Waterloo, but then I also sit as a councillor at the region of Waterloo, which is the upper tier municipality, which also has a lot of interest in housing and land development and things of that nature. But I was elected in 2024, so I'm about halfway through my term. I lead a council of 8, of which 6 of us are women. And I think a couple are here today, Councillor Bodley and Councillor Julie Wright, because they are also very passionate about sustainability and climate change. And we've really, from the outset, a year and a half ago with our council, made that a real priority based on what we heard from the community while we were out door knocking, but then also based on what we heard from the work that staff did with our strategic planning, that this is really climate change, housing, of course, are the two biggest issues that we're facing right now in the short term, but certainly over the longer term as well. So I ran for office because of my particular concern and interest in climate change, but I see it, of course, very much linked with housing and the housing crisis as well. So we're in a moment right now that's very challenging, but I think we always, as elected officials or leaders in any organization, it's really incumbent that we always look towards the future. And so, the way that these two issues are really closely linked and dovetailed together, along with transit and transportation, I think, really lends itself really great to, taking action on climate change, housing, transportation, but also really community building and building communities that are welcoming for all. So,
thank you. Yeah. Sean?
Yeah, so I work with Union Co-operative. We think we're one of the first of our kinds, or the first of our kind in Canada, of using the cooperative model for housing, a lot like we would with renewable energy. So you see a lot of renewable energy cooperatives raising funds for solar and wind. from community members, people just like us who care about climate change, who want to be part of the solution. But for some reason, we'd never seen that same approach applied to affordable housing. We see real estate investment trusts, REITs, raising lots of money, including from our pension funds and other retirement savings, to put towards housing, sometimes with good results, sometimes not so good results. But what if we as a community could take the same approach, but instead of looking to maximize our profits, look to maximize our values, to take care of our neighbors and the things that we care most about? And so we launched Union Co-operative a few years back. We purchased our first property in 2022 with 60 apartments, all 2 bedrooms that we rent for between as low as $1,000 a month to folks with different barriers to accessing housing, including new Canadians and women leaving shelter, but also just to working class folks who are being priced out. I joke that we're the co-op time machine, that really what we're doing is rolling the clock back 10 years to when a working person in our community or someone retired on a fixed income could still afford somewhere to live in our community. I'm really happy to say that over 240 of our neighbors have joined the cooperative and put their money where their hearts are to step forward and say that we are going to make our community more affordable because that's what we care about. And in the process, we're looking to invest in retrofits of the building as well. We just completed an audit with the hope of reducing our GHGs by 90% in this property.
That's so great. Thank you. Adrienne.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Adrienne. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on this panel. I work for a firm called SHS Consulting. We've been around for about 25 years. We are totally on a mission to solve all affordable housing challenges across Canada. We truly believe that we can eliminate homelessness, that everyone can have a safe place to live and call home. We situate ourselves kind of in that problem space as thinking about how to actually create a really resilient housing system. So where are all the different kind of places that we can play to make sure that not only today and tomorrow we have places to live, but that actually can last, in the long term, and that as people's lives change, as some of the crises that Helen was mentioning, as those emerge, how can our system make sure that it can adapt and kind of continually make sure that we have places where people can live safely and affordably and adequately. And we do that in 3 different ways. So one is through supporting governments, like the City of Waterloo, for example, with innovative housing policy development. So looking at what's the big picture of the demographics in our community, and how is it changing over time, and what kind of housing are we going to need in the future, and how can we actually promote and incentivize those types of housing to get created. And then we also help organizations like Sean's who are maybe starting up or looking to develop affordable housing. We usually call it non-market housing. So for us, any housing that is owned by nonprofits or groups that are not seeking to earn a profit, and their goal is long-term and perpetual affordability. We help them go through the whole real estate development process from the moment they have an idea until people get to move in. And then we also do a lot of work in bringing big groups of people together like this who all want to try and solve a complex challenge around housing and figure out how can we all have a role in the solution. So glad to be here on this panel as well.
Wow, that's a pretty great panel, no? I'm impressed. Okay, so how we're going to do this, I have a series of questions that I prepared that we can start the conversation that way. And then once we've had a chance to roll through some of those ideas, we'd like to open it up to you. So as we're going through, if you have something that you really want to add to the conversation, just make sure you start to jot down your thoughts and think about who you want to address it to, or maybe to the panel as a whole. And we'll have about 15 minutes at the end of the panel today to do that. Okay? Good. Okay. I wrote them down, so I've got to read them. So, kind of building from what I talked about before, climate change is upon us. It's adding pressure to the housing crisis in both the short and long-term view, right? So our houses today may not be fully equipped to deal with climate change that we're feeling now, but many places are really not equipped going forward. How might we prepare tomorrow's housing for the shift in climate conditions? So extreme heat, flooding, severe storms, all that kind of stuff that we're likely to experience going forward. And then as a subtopic, can we reach net zero readiness with our current housing approaches? And then for all of you, maybe if you can share some innovations either that you've been involved with or that you know of that are happening elsewhere. So I'll start with you.
Okay, great, thank you. Lots of questions in there, but there's a few things. I think the short answer, unfortunately, to can the current housing solutions, can we reach net zero with the current housing solutions? I think, unfortunately, the answer is no. I think that's pretty clear. I think we need to, part of what I'm concerned about and I see in some communities, is that continued sprawl, for one thing, that's just spreading our communities out. So I think that's a big challenge right there. Adding land to cities is, in the city of Waterloo, we've years ago said these are our boundaries, and we've reached our boundaries, but we're really building infill, and that's been a strategic direction for about 20 years. I think we really need to, we are working with our development community and other nonprofits, with community energy and things like that, to get in place region-wide green development standards. I'm pretty impatient because I keep hearing, oh, it's going to take another 2 years, and it's like, there's things we know we need to do, there's things we know we need to change, but we're sort of stuck in that. We've got to bring everyone along with us. But we know we need to do those things. So partly I think our council's a little impatient, and it's like we need to get on with these things. One of the things that I'm really excited about, that's very much a now project, and it's hot off the presses. We just approved yesterday at council a request. We are looking at the city of Waterloo. We have 25 acres of city-owned property, and because we were successful in getting the Housing Accelerator Fund, we are taking that 25 acres, and just yesterday we decided as a council, based on community consultation, to ask the province to give us an MZO, a friendly MZO we call it, to convert that from, it's a piece of property that's been 25 years sitting there as an employment property. Employment, where we play employment has changed, so we are going to convert that, if the province lets us, from employment to residential, and then we are going to work with nonprofits in our community, very likely people like Sean and some others, to turn that into affordable and attainable housing. But we will set, we don't have the RFP ready yet, but that's coming. We will set some really high sustainability standards to go along with that. And part of what's really exciting, we'll create somewhere in the neighborhood of, we have to wait to have the RFPs come in, the ideas from the community, but, we were initially hoping maybe 700. Now we're looking at maybe 900 plus. Based on community consultation, we were going to do 6 stories, and people said go higher, add like a complete community, add commercial and things like that, commercial retail. So we're going to do that. But yeah, we're hoping we can get over 900 units on this property, and again with really high sustainability standards in place. And it's going to be on a transit route that already exists. There's walking trails, there's bike lanes, there's close to lots of recreation around there, schools, East Side Library. So we're really excited about that. That's going to be a big play. We're going to get that, if everything goes well, shovels in the ground starting at some point next year.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's myself and council, and we voted unanimously to go forward with this, and we have some really great staff helping us through this. So we're tremendously excited about it, and hope it's an example that other municipalities will be able to learn from.
That's great. Sean?
One of the things that makes us so challenging in Waterloo Region, but also really special, is that we have so many different municipalities here. So when we have a rock star like Dorothy running ahead, being impatient, making that happen, what a great example for others as well. Dorothy can't say that, but I can. I think for
Rockstar Council.
Rockstar Council, absolutely, and staff too. When I think about the sustainability question, we're really fortunate that there's a program through the National Housing Strategy that CMHC is running that is helping us with that really deep reduction. the type of technology we're using wouldn't be affordable for us otherwise. So I think there is a really important place for government to be involved here, just like in the full housing spectrum. It doesn't mean the government has to be the only solution, but it's important that government's at the table to be a solution. At the same point, there's challenges with that program, and it's been undersubscribed, but I think it's really important. So it can get us almost a 90% GHG reduction and an 80% energy reduction. That's huge. And that's based on today's energy rates as well. One of the big challenges is our grids become dirtier over the last few years. This government's decided, provincial government's decided to make our grid less efficient. So even as we electrify, I can't go to true net zero or true zero carbon if the energy that we're pulling from is coming from natural gas rather than from nuclear and solar that we were working on before. So this is a big system change as opposed to just a housing organization change. For us, though, we think about all of the ability to do some of these deep retrofits has to respect the tenants in place as well. This can't be a tool or a strategy for displacement and for just jacking up the rents for low-income tenants who are in these older properties. The most affordable properties in our community were built between 1960 and 1980. These are also the units that are experiencing the highest increase or the greatest increase in rents, even more so than buildings built after 2018 that have no rent control. That's insane. That's wild. And the reason is because the rents are so low that you do a retrofit, you're able to get the rents up and you can really quickly drive a return. So by bringing these units into non-market ownership, by finding different strategies for doing that, all of a sudden we get to make the building better for the people who already live there. If government is taking a more active role in supporting retrofits, we need to take a stand and say any government support for retrofits comes with that requirement that it's for the people who live there today, as well as those to come in the future. It's not a tool for displacement. When we think then about how we can move forward more generally, I think a lot of it comes down to partnership, showing that it works and then replicating it. It gets cheaper as we do this at scale, and we can do it again and again. There will be some times where we need to knock down a building where it's at the end of its useful life. Where possible, we should try and save them, but sometimes it's not the right thing anymore. Dorothy mentioned sprawling out onto our farms, forests, and drinking water, which is really important here in our region. There is a need to build up as well. I'm pretty loud. I can always take this off and just keep going. So there is that need for infill development as well. One of the things we have to do, though, is think about how do we move people out of their current homes, almost have a community-owned hotel so that we can redevelop really deeply efficient buildings and move people back in at their current rates in their current neighborhood. So this is a big, messy challenge, but one that we can figure out together as just good, hardworking, honest people trying to find a solution. There are solutions out there, and we'll find them working together.
And you're doing what I ask people to do, is think in systems, right? Because it's a systemic problem. That's
Absolutely.
Great, amazing.
That was the exact thread I was going to pick up, and just this piece about the systems. And Sean, I love that you brought up the point just about the current residents and relocation and how that works and kind of the threat to a lot of our naturally occurring affordable housing. That's a big problem in Toronto as well, in terms of our apartment buildings that all got built at the same time, in the 70s, and now all of those require retrofits. There's some good research from the Wellesley Institute and ERA Architects, who have done a lot of work on tower renewal in the GTA. If you want to, if folks are kind of interested in reading more about some of those strategies too. I think the other piece that's promising is that because we do have we're coming back into an investment in housing in Canada. We just had the new Canada Housing Plan come out a few weeks ago, and with the new federal budget, there is this opportunity to kind of do some really good policy making and attach the carrots with the sticks. So I think as Mayor Dorothy was mentioning, you have this opportunity with this big swath of land. Let's not lose that opportunity to actually put some great requirements around energy efficiency. So I think we do have a bit of an opportunity for the future, new builds, but I think, of course, there's a lot of challenge with the retrofits.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, we've lost Sean for a moment. So we'll go forward in a different cycle. I was going to go to him next. Okay, so
could I just add,
yes,
just
go ahead.
with your last point, and then also to pick up on some of the keeping the naturally occurring apartment buildings. One of the things that we did at the region of Waterloo, and that we're going to, I shouldn't presume the way council's going to vote, but I'm hoping that our council will vote for on June, at one of our June meetings, is that we put in place a property tax exemption to support the type of work that, he's back, that Sean and people like that are going to do. So there's some big, and there's a few other big policy pieces that we put into place at the region that, again, we will look to replicate locally.
So there's incentives and motivation for people to do the right thing. Yeah, great. Okay, I'm going to shift a little bit and talk.
Quickly add on some of these incentives. The really exciting thing here is sometimes it actually works out better for everyone else too. In the case of the property tax piece, the alternative that has been suggested by the province is to reduce property taxes for the whole class of existing apartment buildings, which would have a huge knock-on effect. It would increase the taxes for small businesses, for homeowners. So by targeting this, we get to say, well, it's only going to go for the folks who actually step up and help affordable housing. So much smaller impact. But even more than that, when we reduce it for the whole class, we then encourage the eviction of tenants to get it back up to rental rates. Yep. It increases the wealth for the wealthy already based on how we value buildings. So all of a sudden, doing the right thing not only helps affordable housing, but it helps everyone else in that system as well.
So they want to be part of it. Yeah. That's great. Okay. I talked, the very first point I made previously was about changing demographics in Canada. By 2050, there's likely to be over 2.7 million people age 85 or older. That's a lot. That's a 3 times increase. And so Canada is also experiencing record immigration in the past few years with a concurrent shrinking of household size. So we have many older people, sometimes living alone, many more people coming into Canada, and household size shrinking. Are we preparing for these kind of seismic shifts? So you're building housing, but when there's so many people who want to live either alone or as a small family, are we preparing for that? And so I'm going to start with you, Sean.
Maybe. We're all trying really hard to build more right now, and I think that's a key solution, is to build homes that are accessible, affordable, in good locations, and ultimately that are respectful of folks as well. We see, and there's lots of research and reports, maybe even from some of the folks here in this room, that racism and sexism are pervasive across the housing space, that people with that kind of money and power have a lot of both, and that makes for a distorted relationship. So thinking about those aspects as well, are we building the right size of units that people want to live within as well? Are we building units or homes, communities where people are able to participate in decision making so that they're culturally relevant as well? Maybe there are certain things that are unique in terms of what a community or culture wants in terms of shared space as well. Yeah, it's a big project. Maybe someone else has a better answer than me on that.
Go ahead.
Your question, Helen, of, are we doing it or how are we doing it? So I guess the promising piece is I think we have a lot of the information. I think municipalities are all required to do these studies of, their housing needs assessments and look at kind of the long-term view of how are the population demographics going to change over time. But then how to actually kind of adapt everything that we have so that it works for folks. So if I'm going through my life and some life circumstance changes, whether it's because I'm aging or because I have something happen with my health or a family situation or whatever it is, there's unlimited possibilities of what would happen that might change my housing situation. I can either kind of retrofit the situation I'm in to make it work for me today, or I actually need to find an alternative. And our system today is quite homogenous in terms of, the groups that build. It's very large developer focused. We have fewer small players who are making kind of unique offerings that might fit specific needs of folks. It's very, you rent or you own, and then we have Sean here who's trying to kind of like break that system and come up with something in between. and in terms of affordability too. It's like you're living in an ownership that's really expensive, or you're renting and you're trying to make ends meet. So I think it's going to come down to diversity, not just of what does it look like, but who owns it, who builds it, where is it located, what services are attached to it, all of these other pieces. So I think there's progress being made in that space, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts too.
Well, and I think, from a city perspective, excuse me, where some of that, those ideas and those needs hit the road is that we need to look at our zoning, right? And I'm not a planner and I'm not an expert on this, but we need to look at, for example, some of our neighborhoods that are zoned for single family, right? What would be wrong with putting in a fourplex or a three? So we do already, the province has mandated that like triplex or threeplexes can go in kind of as of right. The question in front of our council and other councils is, and we're in the process of updating our official plan, is, fourplexes. These aren't towers, these are fourplexes, right? And what I hear a lot from seniors who are ready to downsize from some of their, 3, 4, 5 bedroom homes is they really like their neighborhood, because we've got some great neighborhoods across the city, but they really want to stay there, but there's no options. So, so allowing, fourplexes or threeplexes or, a variety of housing mix in what traditionally has been a single-family neighborhood, I think that's the reality. That's where we have to go, and that's what councils and residents who live in these communities need to get their minds around. And I find myself, when I'm going through communities, I'm looking at all kinds of different buildings, and how high is that one, and how big is that? And if you look at a monster house, one of those great big monster houses, you could have a really nice fourplex that's like the same size or even a little bit smaller. Right? They fit right in. They already exist in a lot of our communities, and people kind of don't see them because they've been there so long. So I think that's really, what we need to think about, because there's so many seniors who are kind of stuck, and they want to downsize, but they don't have the place quite where they want to go. But then on top of that, as a city, we need to think about the accessibility piece, and developers need to think about that. Like, why are we putting stairs in so many places instead of ramps? And and what kind of technology should people be asking for in a home, right, or apartment, whatever the unit looks like? Are there, for seniors, right? If you haven't crossed a threshold, by 10 o'clock every morning, someone goes to check on you. There's things like that we should be thinking about incorporating, builders should be thinking about incorporating into developments, so that we're taking into account, just the needs of people as they're aging. But certainly the accessibility, writ large, that universal design is something that really needs to be thought through much more carefully and much more, universally.
Can I ask all of you to identify, is anybody doing it?
We're going to do it.
Can you think of some examples?
Well, I love that you brought up the fourplex piece, because I was hoping that was going to come up. But this ties in really nicely to this kind of overarching theme of public perception and sentiment, and what we think good housing is, and what our dream of housing looks like. I was doing my master's thesis actually with Helen, and we came across this research that was looking at kind of the impacts of the 2008 financial crisis, and one of these kind of sentiments was, if you change the dream, you change the city. So if you change what we actually care about in a city, then you can actually change what it looks and feels and how we live. And so this piece around the fourplexes, so in Toronto, we've legalized the fourplexes, and everyone's saying, what good is that? The economics don't work and no one's ever going to do it. But the small nugget in there, that's the signal, is that, we actually now believe that 4 units can go on one property that used to be 1, and that actually matters, that we've shifted kind of that thinking. So it's the first little nugget. Maybe we haven't figured out how to make it work economically yet, but it is a nice shift in public perception that hopefully, I hope it passes in your municipality too, and I believe it will.
Yeah, I think if we're going to use 25 acres of publicly owned land, we're probably open to fourplexes.
Totally.
But go ahead. I just lost my train of thought. To be honest.
You do this when you're ready, and then I'll stop talking.
Okay,
afterwards.
okay.
I'll stall for you. There are some examples. We're speaking right now with the
I got it.
with the nonprofit cooperative housing association here locally. There's a lot of nonprofit housing co-ops that were built in the 70s and 80s. We haven't had a new nonprofit housing co-op in Waterloo region since Bob Ray was in power in the early 90s. And our community's changed a heck of a lot since then. It's grown a lot. It's become a lot more diverse. But we haven't really changed since then. And there's lots of reasons for that. But we're at this interesting time where people have lived in these housing co-ops for decades. And they were built before accessibility standards are what they are today. Before construction standards maybe were where they needed to be as well. Some of them are getting a little bit older. Could we actually redevelop these existing sites where we can have more density, still nonprofit owned, and make them accessible? But to do that, we need to make sure the people who have to make that decision, because it's a nonprofit housing co-op, are the people who live there right now. So why would you vote to tear down your own home? So we need to be able to find an alternative spot for folks to live, and a site like this that Dorothy's talking about, we can build something new. This is one solution to overhoused seniors as well. If we can create a respectful community nonprofit-owned space where people can age in place, free up these 2-3-bedroom stacked townhouses in downtown Kitchener and uptown Waterloo, that's a win for everyone. It's a win for the new families who are moving into Canada, and we're so lucky to choose to come to our community, who are starting families, need more bedrooms. And it's a win for seniors who get to stay within those communities that they care about, those nonprofit housing co-op communities, maybe not this specific neighborhood, and staying at an affordable rate where they can age in place respectfully as well. It's really hard to make the case for someone to sell their single-family home that they own, that they have security of tenure in, that they've paid off, and now they're just paying taxes on and some upkeep, to move into a brand new $2,000 a month apartment that they can be evicted from at any point or have their rents increased at any point. It's a hard sell. If we want to make use of the thousands of existing unused bedrooms in our communities, we need to make a really compelling case to seniors that we respect you, we'll provide an affordable home for you that you can stay as long as you want. Let's pass these existing really great homes that you raise your families in over to the next families moving into our community.
That's great.
And what I wanted to say about, is anyone doing it? Like was it in March, April? There are some builders who are doing this, who are like that. They're coming to us with geothermal, heat pumps, energy efficiency, but also some affordable, accessible, like building the accessibility into their design. So there are some. I'm thinking of the one over on Dietz Ave that we just approved a few weeks ago. He came to us with a lot of those elements already into it. So I think there certainly are developers who are trying. Yeah.
That's great. I'm going to ask you to do a rapid round because I can't believe we've already used up almost all our time because the conversation is great. But I'm wondering, you've mentioned affordability so many times. You're all really working in that area. But if you could make one systemic change to make housing more affordable to Canadians, what would it be? I'll give you a chance to think first. And then you can just pop up and tell me, whoever can.
I can start with a really big picture one, because then I feel like then you'll get more practical. But so when we adopted the National Housing Strategy Act, we actually declared that you have the right to housing in Canada. And then the federal government said, how do we actually do that? And what does that actually mean? So I would love to see us actually adopt some of the principles of what it means to have the right to housing. And some of those that I think are really important, one are maximum of available resources. So it means that the government must invest a maximum of available resources into solving the problem and eliminating homelessness and making sure we have the right to housing. And then one of the other ones that I find really interesting is interjurisdictional collaboration. So we can't have any more pointing of fingers of, that's not my problem, that's your problem, all of that. So if we did those two things, I think we would actually make a lot of progress.
Wow.
Because this doesn't impact my friend Mayor McCabe, I'll say no more urban golf courses would be a good starting point. Short of that, and of course the region of Waterloo does have the power to take urban golf courses, but that's a different conversation. I think the reality is right now people do not have the right to housing. As a landlord, I'm able to evict someone by going to the tribunal, and it's not a high bar, a high threshold to cross. So we're starting by asking this question of how do we move from being our legal definition of a landlord to the more aspirational housing provider? Like, what does that mean? If someone's not paying their rent, what do? Do we just move to evict them? No. Well, we'll pass them over to the region or to Lutherwood to see about housing rental supports. Well, not everyone fits. If you're not a permanent resident or citizen, you don't access these programs. If you don't meet other criteria, you can't access these programs. So can we create our own eviction prevention fund that we fund as members of the cooperative, as owners of people in the community, to fill the gaps left by these policy failures in our community and in the province? If someone is experiencing domestic violence, do we call the police? Do we instead try and create a network of well-intentioned landlords who will prioritize the next available unit for anyone in our network who is experiencing this challenge? Like, how do we move beyond just affordability into this rights-based approach and stop asking for other people to do it? Let's start it and then point to that solution and say, get on board. But I think the most transformational policy that is already happening in our community right now is this property tax piece. If we're looking at a property, it will bring the amount of equity we need down from 40 or 50% of the property down to 20 or 15%. It's really hard to raise money to buy a building. Banks are great at raising it, so go to the banks and have them pay for as much of it as they can, but they're going to want you to put up something. And this tax piece really helps us push things forward. The other kind of big picture dream idea would be to think about having dedicated mortgage funding for affordable housing. Right now, the wars in the Middle East, the trust in the US government is increasing bond yields in the United States, which is increasing bond yields here in Canada, which is increasing our cost for building affordable housing. That's pretty nuts. If there is a way that the government or the Bank of Canada could actually say, well, one of our tools for creating money is by pumping it out through the affordable housing sector, like, wouldn't that be great if we had predictable, low-cost sources of funding? But this starting point, we're doing it today thanks to Mayor McCabe and other municipalities in the region of Waterloo with this property tax piece that's transformational.
And those are exceptional answers, to which I'll add that Kindred Credit Union is doing that kind of affordable housing. Like, we actually just invested some of our city dollars into a GIC that they have, it's set up specifically for nonprofits to access to build affordable housing. So there are some of those things that are available right now to do. I think, quite frankly, the affordability piece, it's the cost of housing, and we're looking at, mass timber and like ways to standardize some of it and like modular homes. So I think that's part of the answer, so that you can, build them in a factory like they do in Europe in some cases, and then bring them on site, right? And you can have a complex built in, like a condo complex built in like 8 to 10 months versus 3 or 4 years, right? So we need to kind of, again, think about that, and then which drives down the cost, but also it's like, what do we need to change with our building codes? What maybe we need to change in our planning practices on a practical level to allow those kind of innovations to occur. But affordability writ large is, it's really about building that complete community, right? Where people, affordability is your house. It's how you move around the community. It's how you're accessing things, right? So we have to really think about it, I think, in that really broad scope of, what a person's, their entire life.
I thought you were just all going to say change the zoning.
Also change the zoning too.
I should say a municipal politician can't be on a panel about housing without saying we need more money from the federal and the provincial governments to do, so that we can continue to do some of the work like the Housing Accelerator Fund's enabling us to do.
And since our hosts here today are the University of Waterloo, and I went to the University of Waterloo as well, worked there as well, I will say that the University of Waterloo no longer has to follow zoning rules, and they're the largest landowner, I think, in Waterloo, most of that green space. So if we're looking for who can solve the affordable housing crisis, particularly for students, we found it. We know who to talk to.
Fantastic. Okay. Those were way deeper and more exciting answers to my very broad questions. Thank you. I now want to open it up to you. I heard even in the break that some of you already had questions. And so what do you want to ask these panelists?
Hi, my name is Kay Valley, and I just wanted to say congratulations, Sean and Mayor McCabe. I think that's great what you guys have accomplished. Adrienne, you mentioned something about changing the dream. I love that. And you also said something about the diversity of the ecosystem. So I wanted to ask Mayor McCabe about how do organizations that are co-ops and social impact organizations, how can we do work with the city? How can we get involved in a project like Sean's?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think I'm going to go back to the same project I've referred to a couple of times, like this project where the city is going to be tendering 25 acres. I mean, that is, I think, the opportunity to work with, it could be one development or nonprofit developer, or it could be several, right? Like, so we're really looking for the community to come to us. And again, we'll be ready to tender somewhere, assuming that we get the MZO. I should put that caveat in. As long as the province is going to allow us to do that, we should be ready to tender by September. And we really are looking to the community and nonprofits in the community to come to us with some really creative ideas. So I think that is right in front of us is the best opportunity that I can see. But beyond that, certainly, we have established an affordable housing grant program where we've put some dollars in. There's May 31st that's when we're looking for applications to come in. It's 1.1 million, so it's not huge, but it's to help seed some nonprofits from a variety of backgrounds to do that kind of work. And like I said, we've put some money into investment dollars into Kindred Credit Union. That's another place where nonprofits can go, and it's specifically for affordable housing.
I don't know if it's helpful for me to add, but just something that we always tell the groups that we work with is kind of start from a place of what can you bring that your organization has kind of as their like secret sauce. So is it that you can actually bring equity and help build? Is it that you're amazing at operating housing? Is that you're great at animating, cultural spaces? So kind of what is that piece that you'd like to get involved in? And then maybe it's a partnership, with someone like Sean or with another organization, but how do you kind of fit into the big picture of what would make that 25 acres an amazing place to be? We usually kind of start there.
Yeah, and if you want to talk to the staff, our planning staff about it, we'd be happy to set that up.
Kay, I know you're doing really cool stuff because we've had the opportunity to chat a few times, and I've had the opportunity to learn from you and what you're doing. I guess the only thing to add too is we bought our building without any government support, not because we turned it down, just nobody offered it. Would have happily said yes. So, just get started too, and then it's amazing how people want to talk to you differently or just talk to you at all once you've done the thing. And I know that you're making so much progress, and it's going to be really cool to see when that's launched. And any way that Union Co-op or just myself personally can support that work, would love to. Yeah.
Oh. Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Any other questions from our local audience? There's somebody up there. Go ahead.
Okay,
Yep.
sorry, thank you. After hearing about Ms. Kerr's presentation earlier and the rise of homelessness in cities, and then now the National Housing Strategy Act and the right to housing for Canadians, I'm wondering how the rising homelessness will be reflected in future housing in Canada, and who exactly has the right to housing.
So yeah, I can start if I caught the whole question. So the notion is that as we've adopted that act, that we kind of all have shifted our roles in the system. So instead of thinking of us all as kind of just citizens, we are actually now rights holders. Instead of we're thinking about, the governments are now duty bearers is what they call them. And then, everyone else who's like a player in the system is a responsibility holder. So I think there's kind of like a shift in how we actually think about the roles in the system and how we can actually think about how, you and I and, everyone in this room actually becomes a rights holder when it comes to the right to housing. I think Sean was giving some good examples around evictions, like how does that impact evictions? How does that impact, the role of a landlord? So I think there's some kind of bigger fundamental questions about how it's actually applied that are still in play, including a really key piece of the puzzle is actually legal recourse. So to have the right to housing, there has to be legal recourse so that you can actually kind of like take it up the ladder. If there's a problem, we can actually kind of address it in more of a legal way. So all of that is still kind of being played out. One thing that they're doing right now, they've created a national housing council. We have now a federal housing advocate that's meant to be kind of like the watchdog of these issues and the trends at a bigger scale. But I don't think they've figured out yet how to deal with kind of the individual violations of that human right yet. I'm not sure if that totally answers the question, but it's a lot of scaffolding.
I'll just jump in to say at a local level, at our regional government, we passed and put about $10 million to date, there's probably going to be more coming, into what we call a plan to end chronic homelessness. So it's essentially, and it's the plan isn't fully built out yet, but what the initial parts of it are built on input from people who are currently living unhoused or people who are very precariously housed. So it's informed by their life experience and their recommendations, and there's a continuing consultation, like community board that's like informed. That's the people who are experiencing this are informing it. So it's not perfect, and there's a lot we need to learn and a lot we need to change, but that's where the idea about the property tax exemption came from, for example. But at the core of it is, going to change the work that our staff at the region do, in terms of how we approach chronic housing, chronically unhoused and homelessness, and how we approach, what we need to do in terms of like rent supplements versus shelters and things like that. So there's a plan, if you want to, Google it, for the region of Waterloo. It's ambitious. It's not the plan to partly end homelessness. It's the plan to end chronic homelessness. So some of it's just the, putting that out there and really the recognition that of the depth of the problem that we have and trying to get out in front of it is part of the direction that we're going at the region of Waterloo.
I would also say yes and to both things. We also need to build more as well. Someone from one of the local school boards reached out just the other day and said they're trying to support a family to find a 2-bedroom apartment, and they just can't find one. And we don't have any vacancies. I reached out to a few other housing agencies. They don't have any vacancies. So how do we build more homes? I was talking to someone the other day, 2 families living in a 2-bedroom apartment, not because they want to as some co-living experiment, but because there's just nowhere else for them to go that they can afford. You can't have housing as a human right if there's just not housing for people to live in. So all of this has to kind of come together. A bit of a straw poll here too, if that's okay. How many of you are undergrad students? So I think we need to get more undergrad students involved in this stuff too, that all big social change that happens in a lot of ways is driven by young people. And we don't have enough young people here, in part because of housing poverty. When I teach at Laurier, and in the 4th year class I was teaching, every one of the students had full-time jobs. I was making all sorts of different decisions in my 4th year. I wasn't working as any full-time jobs. We need students to be able to have that ability. A few examples. Laurier's sustainability office wasn't created by the university. They didn't really want to. The students passed a resolution and they funded it themselves. They paid for the salary of the sustainability office for years before the university finally took it over. The bus pass that we have here today was created by the Laurier Student Public Interest Research Group. Undergrad students funded it. Waterloo took it on next because of students, then Conestoga College. The LRT system that I took here today was in part justified by the student ridership that came from that pass. So we need to be thinking too about, power isn't given away. How do we make sure there are conditions for doing it too. I don't normally talk like this, but we're in a university environment, so I think it's worth thinking about this too. Normally I go out asking people for investments, but this is the type of stuff that we need to be thinking about as academics, as people in this space, is how do we set the conditions for social change? And part of that system, a really important part of that system, are students being able to agitate and to demand that these systems change as well.
Yeah.
We've lost that in a lot of ways.
Well said. Another question? Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I better tune it down here. So I live on the eastern fringes of the downtown east side in Vancouver, and semantics are a really important thing there because as you probably all are aware from the media and whatnot, there are many homeless, so-called homeless camps and whatnot, but my Indigenous friends, of which most the people occupying those spaces are Indigenous people, point out they are home. They're just houseless. So keeping that in mind when you're talking about, finding places, especially say in, regional municipality of Waterloo, for breaking up camps and putting people out of, these temporary encampments into housing, don't forget that there's community in those encampments, and the worst thing that can happen is that they get busted up and sent here, there, and ever to either temporary or hopefully permanent. And then the other part of it is that there are still people that are living in community that can't move inside, and we have to figure out a way how to accommodate them. Well, the Supreme Court has said, yeah, you can camp in a park as long as you're out of there by 9 a.m. and don't interfere with the rest of the community's rights to use that park freely, right? So anyway, but that's not what I was going to say. I was going to say this business, and it brings in the SDGs in a way which is about equity, and of moving from 6 stories to 9 stories means that, because from my way of thinking about housing and as a landscape architect and ecologist, is that we shouldn't be building houses taller than the tallest tree we can grow in that neighborhood, so that everybody is living under shade, because heat islands are a thing, extreme weather events are a thing. And so the people that are living in floors 7, 8, and 9 are going to be above the tallest tree that we can grow in this community. And so they don't have the same access to that shade and all of the other ecosystem services that those trees provide. And so, I'm just thinking that when it comes to design, we're thinking about, yes, accessibility, but accessibility to nature is another really big thing. And it's not just down on the ground, it's like in what your actual living space is about. So I don't know whether it's a question or a comment, but whatever.
That's great.
Thank you.
If it's okay, I can jump in quickly. It's also a really efficient way to build. A lot of the most affordable ways to build are 6 to 8 stories as well. So, we're thinking about affordable housing. That works out really well. To your point around Indigenous housing, I was at the Canadian National Community Land Trust Conference in the fall, and some Indigenous activists rightly pointed out, they took the stage and they pointed out that this whole conference is about ownership, of bringing land into community ownership, and forgetting that, sure, you did a land acknowledgement at the start, but the whole conversation is about ownership of land. It's not fully including Indigenous folks. For us at Union Cooperative, we don't yet have a land acknowledgement on our website because we want to actually include more to it of land acknowledgement, but then the things we're doing to make that real. One of those things was working with local Indigenous groups, housing organizations, when we were working with the region to create this property tax exemption. So there's actually specific language in the policy tool to make sure that Indigenous housing organizations will never have to pay property tax on the Haldeman Tract treaty land ever again. When we're thinking about this land at the city of Waterloo, these 25 acres, how do we make sure that it's not just Indigenous consultation on the land, but actually Indigenous housing on the land as well, that's owned by, operated by, controlled by Indigenous folks as well. So trying to move that one step beyond of building in an efficient manner, in this case, right by the river, right by, forested areas as well, but also making, being really intentional with our word choice, but also really intentional by following through with actions that are concrete and truly transfer power and land back to the folks who deserve it.
Thank you. I'm going to give the last question to you, and then and you can sneak it if you have to, because we're right at 12. So, quick question and quick answers, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you guys for the great discussion today. I'm an out-of-towner. I've lived here for a few years. I'm an alumni of the University of Waterloo, and so what you said about students, that really resonated with me. And so, as a graduate student now, and someone who's living with his family, what I've seen in Waterloo and in the GTA as well, is that young families and immigrant families and families across the board are in a catch-22 right now, meaning that they aren't able to afford the housing that they need for the size of their family. They're not able to do that, so they're forced to downgrade to let's say like a 2-bedroom sort of accommodation, or a 3-bedroom accommodation when they have quite a few kids. And so when they try to opt for those kinds of housing accommodations, a lot of landlords won't take them in because there's an excess usage of water, or there's a drain on resources, or the space is limited. So they're in a catch-22 situation. Many of these families, sometimes they have to go through less than savory routes. So what I'm curious about is, in this locality, and any of you can answer this, I guess, what sort of approaches are being used, and what sort of approaches can be used to deal with this? It's almost a paradoxical situation, right? Like these families really don't know what to do in these situations. So I'm just curious for your insights on that.
Yeah, and we certainly hear that quite a bit. That from our business community as well. I was meeting with the owner of the managing director of a tech company just a couple of weeks ago, who said, it's a recruitment and it's a recruitment and retention challenge too. That if we don't have housing that's affordable for people who are software engineers or nurses or teachers or whatever, right, wherever people are coming from and their qualifications, like, they're not going to come to our community. And we're a community that thrives on the students, the 3 post-secondary institutions that are here. We want people to come here, stay here from wherever they're coming from in Canada or across the world. So I mean, part of it is we're starting to hear a little bit about from some of the private sector developers that particularly people who maybe originally had condos, that they're looking at, and we're building them for the investor market, like 1-bedrooms, that they're starting to hopefully start to shift to think like, we should maybe be building these for the end user market instead of the investor market. So, I mean, if that happens, I think that's a really welcome shift. But I mean, we as a municipality and with our planning staff have to continue to push to say 2, 3, and in some cases 4 bedrooms are what are needed for the changing demographics and the changing reality of our community.
You also have a legal right under the Ontario Human Rights Code not to be discriminated against based on the size of your family. And that piece of legislation supersedes almost every other act in Ontario. It's not enforced, and there's been a really pulling back of the powers of tribunals over the last few years. But that puts all the pressure on a low-income family, or just any family, to have to try and fight for their rights and then awkwardly move into that building after as well. So one way around that is more non-market housing. If we're able to take away some of the market power that people have to exploit folks right now. If you have nowhere else to go, you're desperate, that gives a lot of power to people who are going to use it not for good things. So, potentially to strengthen the existing rules that already exist that are there to protect against this exact situation, but also to make sure that there are more people out there doing good who will try and make sure there's housing for folks like this.
I'll just make it super fast. I know we're over time. Last point that's kind of on topic and off topic and back to our previous question, but I think we've all been, over the course of this whole panel, talking about how to make great outcomes for people and housing and all these pieces, and it's important that I think in all of our work we probably always go back to thinking about this is about people and this is about people's lives. So always kind of connecting back to when you're working in a complex problem, we're challenged to be bold, but every attempt actually counts, right? I'm not sure if folks have read that paper about how to deal with complex problems, and one of the pieces is like, every attempt actually counts, that you're impacting someone's life by trying to do something differently. So just a good kind of reminder that we always think about that folks are living in different housing situations, and we need to make sure that we're always kind of putting them at the forefront of everything we're trying to do when we're making change. So.
It's a great way to end this conversation. So I want to say a huge thank you to Adrienne and Sean and Dorothy, all who've given us so much to think about. So let's give them an applause. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
And also thank you to our moderator, Helen, for leading such an insightful session. And another round of applause to our panelists for contributing to a rich discussion on the future of housing in Canada. I moved here to Canada for my studies, and I plan on staying here, so I think this is a very, very important conversation to have. And now that it's a few minutes over noon, we'll be moving into a lunch break, and please regroup back here for 1 p.m. for the Sustainable Finance keynote by Jean-Paul Gladue, principal at McCabe and former president of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business.
Thank you. And I know I have tons of questions to ask, and I think we can have really great conversations over lunch. So lunch will be self-served in the foyer, and you're welcome to go into the courtyard for those conversations or out for a walk if the weather permits. But please do be back here for 1 p.m. For a talk from J.P. Gladue. There are signs posted around the venue, but let one of our volunteers or staff know if you have any questions. Remember, just look for the green lanyards. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy lunch.
Thank you.